My third day in a strange town, and I already knew I had to leave. I've gotten pretty used to leaving places behind, but even I didn't expect to be hitting the road again so soon. But I was already getting it everywhere I turned. A mystery that has haunted me since childhood, that has already driven me to the brink of suicide, that has chased me from one end of the country to the other and back, and then back again. And no matter how far I run, I'm still no closer to figuring out what it even means, let alone how I can make it stop. I just want to sit down in some dark place and not have to think about it for 40 minutes. A solid 40 minutes without being forced to ponder the insoluble, seemingly cosmic enchantment that has been draped over my life like a veil, and then maybe the pain entangling my head would uncoil just enough for me to find some semblance of peace, however temporary. But I couldn't even find respite in the bottom of a shot glass. Not here, not anywhere. The bartender set the next drink down in front of my bleary eyes and said, "If you're planning to leave, go at your own pace. But if you're thinking about staying, get the fuck out of my bar right goddamn now." He said it with a calm, matter-of-fact tone he had likely arrived at after years of dealing with drunk bastards like myself. I thought I had kept a pretty firm grip on things, considering how many shots I'd put away by then. But that wasn't the way this guy saw it. He didn't want to have to call an ambulance to his place of business on a Wednesday night, and that was it as far as he was concerned. "I'm fine," I said, sounding as bad as I probably looked. "Bullshit," he said in an incongruously amiable tone, as though this were a typical pleasantry. "Just clear out after this one if you're so fine, and we won't have any trouble." "Trouble?" I whined, creeping despondence stealing over me. Peeking out of the corner of my half-question was the acknowledgement that I would soon head out into the night, shuffling along the streets with no place to go. "I just want to sit here. I'm not bugging anybody." "You're bugging me, pal. Call me weird, but I don't like watching people kill themselves. Kind of a pet peeve. Just head out after this one, and that'll be the end of it, Jillamini." I came over cold. I stared at the bartender with a new sense of dread, but he had already walked off to serve another patron, a guy with short, clipped hair who had, no doubt, never been called a weird name in his life. I shifted my gaze down to the brown liquid filling my shot glass. I wanted it more than ever, but I also knew that it wouldn't help. There's never going to be an escape. I can see that now. Doesn't make it easier to accept, but it's something I am going to have to come to grips with. You see, I first started noticing strangers calling me Jillamini, mostly in whispers, around my 9th birthday. Moss. It began on the West Coast, where I grew up in a little forest town called Mount Shasta, but it didn't matter where I went. I was in Philadelphia now, where I'd been for just 3 days, but I started getting Jillamini right off the bus. It had been 12 years since I first heard that word, and if anything, I was hearing it more and more often. I can't be sure it actually started when I was 9. That's just when I first noticed it. It could have been my whole life. It's not the kind of thing you pick up on when you're little. I've tried looking the word Jillamini up online. Returns absolutely 0 hits. I've tried spelling it every which way I can think of, but it still comes up blank. I have to wonder about the odds that almost any random collection of syllables would turn up 0 hits in 2016. It seems pretty hard to believe. Even utter nonsense exists in proliferation online. The output of some water sensor malfunctioning in somebody's basement has its own WordPress page. I've looked up USPS tracking numbers and had the same 16-digit number come up in scientific papers below the results. But I've never been able to find anything that sheds light on why people keep calling me Gillimeny. It isn't just the name. They seem to know things about me. "How's she smoking, Gillimeny?" asked a lady pushing a stroller in Toledo. How did this lady in the middle of the vast desolation of cornfields at the heart of the goddamn country know about the volcano? Don't worry, folks, it's only potentially active, dominating the sky where I grew up. The one that gave the idyllic little city of Mount Shasta its name? How did she know how my friends and I used to make light of the fact that everything we knew might disappear under a wave of ash and magma at a moment's notice, back when Bush was president, and the biggest problem I had was getting a passing grade in pre-algebra? We must have asked each other, "How's she smoking?" about 500 times before we were eligible for driver's licenses. But how did this lady know that? How did she know who I was? It didn't take me long to realize she probably didn't. Neither did this bartender. If I were to ask her, "How's what smoking?" she would say something like, "Pardon?" and give me one of those looks. If I said to the bartender, "Say, why'd you call me Gillimeny just now?" he'd say, "Jill, I what knee?" and decide I was crazy right there on the spot. Jill, I what knee? Christ, if I had a freaking dime. But that's just the thing. None of these people remember saying anything. The lady in Toledo didn't know about Mount Shasta. Of course she didn't know about Mount Shasta. She didn't know shit but cornfields and whatever the fuck else they have in Toledo, motherfucking Ohio. Ball games, I guess. She didn't know shit about Mount Shasta or me because she didn't even realize she had said anything. Don't you get it? These people are just going along, minding their people lives, and they see me on the sidewalk or washed up on their bar stool, and it suddenly comes into their minds to say something to me or about me. Usually it's not even to my face. They whisper. There's a lot of giggles when they're whispering. But if you were to ask these girls what they were laughing at, they would probably stop dead cold on the street and look at each other, wondering what the hell they had been laughing about. I mean, people laugh, right? What's the big deal? Kids walking around, they probably spend half the time laughing and the other half finding something to laugh at. But if you were to stop these kids right in the middle of one of these whisper sessions and say point blank, "What were you just whispering about?" None of them would know. I can guarantee it, the way I can guarantee every last one of those Jilla what knees. I've bussed from one end of this forsaken continent and back, been in and out of diners and flop houses along every interstate you could care to put a number on, and I've tested this hypothesis every which way and the third. But these people do not know that they just said jack shit about Gillimeny. They do not realize that they had just asked a complete stranger about a fucking volcano they've never heard of on the other side of the goddamn country, and they don't know, above all, why the fuck I am asking them. They don't know any more than I do, is the bottom line. And that's the worst part. I mean, if this Gillimeny thing tied into something that made the least bit of sense somewhere down the line, that'd be one thing. But why the fuck me? What do I have to do with it? I mean, I must be singled out somehow, right? This isn't normal, is it? Do people call you some weird word that doesn't even exist no matter where you go? I mean, what the hell do I even have to do with it? I'm just some boring ass kid. Yeah. Only one time did someone ever say something different to me. Something that went deeper than the bare essentials. Over the course of my life, I've convinced myself that I wanted answers. But if that's the kind of answer I'm going to get, well, there's a reason I spend most nights drinking. And it ain't because I can't think of anything else to spend my money on. I was in Spokane, north of where I'm from. I tried my luck on the East Coast and found it wasn't any better than back home. So I thought I'd give the Northwest another try. But I haven't been back since. Not after what I heard. A guy in Riverfront Park, laying by a bench. An honest-to-God bum, just like me, only this guy didn't have a college fund to fall back on. Cardboard sign and everything. I'm walking by, trying to enjoy the day. And it's a beautiful park, lovely city, real nice spring day. But this bum, even though he looks passed out, starts in at me with the, "Look who's back, Jillimeni." And I'd been getting that shit ever since I crossed from Idaho back over into the coastal states, and it was getting on my nerves. I mean, I had learned to handle this stuff as best I could over the years, but I was starting to get sick of the flip I heard in their voices on this trip. Like I had come crawling back or something. It's just, where else was I gonna go? So I said to him, kind of letting it get to me, I said, "Who's back, Cap? Just who the fuck is back? Tell me that." This guy looks up at me, blinking the sun out of his eyes. I realize, from the way he's squinting, that he actually had been asleep. And we're sitting there underneath this beautiful, I don't even know what you'd call it. The park was absolutely beautiful. They had a World's Fair there back in who knows in the name of God, but they did. Lots of great architectural stuff left over from that. And in the middle of it all, this guy looks like he's trying to get a handle on wherever he's finding himself waking up. This guy who smells like a shit just microwaved a burrito in its bed. And it's obvious as hell this poor bastard is lucky his liver even let him show back up for another day of work. And I'm standing over him asking him what in the blue fuck is he talking about. And he looks up at me and says, "Oh dear sweet Jillimeni, it is secreted inside the eyelids of its young, my one and many Jillimeni." I stand there over this guy. People are starting to give us those looks because I'm breathing like I just ran a country mile. And this guy is still blinking like he doesn't know where the fuck he is. And I said, "What is, buddy? What's secreted inside the eyelids of its young?" And he smiles a yellow smile and says, "Duck food, mama, papa. Duck food for everybody." What the fuck, right? That's not what you were just saying, brother. Because I had a feeling that duck food was more along the lines of what people up and down the streets of Spokane had heard this poor, addled guy mumbling about since time out of goddamn mind. But what he had just said before about eyelids was a different story. That's just a big old goose egg for me, I'm afraid. He was real greasy with it, like spending his time by a park bench talking about geese and ducks wasn't all that much of a nonesuch for him. It didn't sound like before. He had sounded real unsure of himself before, when he had said that shit about eyelids. I had myself more worked up than I can remember being in a long time, but I tried to stay calm and I asked him, "What about the eyelids?" When she blinks, it doesn't work, Jillimeni. It has to be between blinkings, or she doesn't eat. Her kids help her make it. The mewling, spooling kids blink with her. It's like a... And he trailed off, looking like a rat had just run off with his words. "It's like a big old goose egg, I spect." "I spect so," I said, blinking myself by then. The heaviest tear I have ever felt ran down my face. Something had come and gone, and I wouldn't get any benefit from sitting here trying to catch a wave that wouldn't ever be coming back. Duck food mostly, he continued, coughing up something dark green. This spiel was clearly part of his regularly scheduled ramblings. Round these parts, most what you'll get is duck food, more or less. Parsley, mostly. I looked down at the guy's sign. Somehow, that was the worst part. It just said parts. Thoughts of mewling young, and eyelids, and blinking, and parts clanging around in my head. I threw up a little on my palm and ran out of the park. So, and that was the end of that. Out of Washington, off the coast, back across the country, little stop in Toledo, goddamn Ohio. And if I felt like doing my best to tilt a presidential election sometime or other, I might have stayed there. But that didn't sound like my kind of gig, so I rode a couple trains down to Florida and slept on a bus up to Philly, and now I'm getting kicked out of a goddamn bar on what is probably the wrong side of town, and I find myself facing a big old question. Couple, actually. Where do I fucking go? And what do I fucking do? And I suppose most people have to wrap their heads around these two concerns at a few points in their lives. But right now, for me, they are something of a pressing matter.